So we'll just start with this. Now, first of all, one thing that's interesting, I think, is that this poem was written, of course, in Chinese, and the poem consisted of sequential lines of only 4 characters each for each line, which is fascinating to me to consider, because it meant that the subtlety of this poem was expressed very economically and very simply, but it also allowed for multiple interpretations, which I think in some ways is part of the point, um, as maybe we'll see. So the first line, the introduction, the mind of the great sage of India was conveyed intimately from west to east. And actually, I think it was really, these were 2 lines, the mind of the great sage of India, and then the second line, conveyed intimately from west to east. So if you can imagine what the Chinese must have been like, mind, great sage, India. Mind, great sage, India. 4 characters, maybe. I don't know Chinese, so I don't know if it was like that, but it must have been something like that. And then conveyed intimately west, east, something like that, because Chinese doesn't have all of the supporting articles and so forth that we have in English, and also, as I understand it, not the tenses that we have for verbs. So you can start to imagine how fluidly this can be translated using different various nouns and verbs in English. So anyway, the mind. What does this mean? This means the vast, great mind of Buddha, Buddha mind, Buddha Dharma, all of the expressions of the depth of understanding that the Buddha had and that he transmitted. And so it's not, so of course, mind in itself is not a thing, right? It's what is it exactly? And what could it mean when we say one mind, a mind in which we all share? What does that mean? But it's something very special, very unusual, special and not special at the same time, because it's all pervading. And then, of course, the great sage of India refers to the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical personage. And then that it was conveyed intimately means refers to what we've talked about many times, that the deep relationship between teacher and student, and how the deep and close connection between teacher and student, whereby the student comes to share in this one mind through the relationship with the teacher and student. So it's not like in the Abrahamic religions where the understanding is developed from reading a book and developing a theology from that. So it's not like that. It's not an intellectual tradition in a lot of ways, although there's a lot of philosophy and so forth that that surrounds it. It in itself is not intellectual, and of course you can gather that from Hui Nun, who was not a scholar, but who grasped the deep nature of reality without the kind of scholarship and intellectual understanding and philosophical commentary that was popular in China at the time. And then west to east talks about that it actually, Buddhism entered China from the west and then traveled across China to the east and south. And so, and because those were the trade routes, because of course, crossing the Himalayas was virtually impossible or very difficult. And so the trade routes went through passes and deserts and so forth. And that was how people traveled, and how information and goods and so forth were were transmitted from back and forth between China and India, for example. So it went from west to east. Which way? This is west. I know you've got the mirror image, and this looks like east to you, but so for you guys, it's like this. It went like this. And then he talks about differences that some people think that there are that only a certain kind of person can be enlightened. Only a certain kind of person can understand. Somebody who is really smart, really scholarly, and or somebody in one or another of the many traditions that started up in China during this period of the flowering of Zen, which going from about the 6th through the 9th centuries. And so, and this was written in sometime during the 8th century. And it's saying, yes, there are all of these different ideas and traditions and that ascribe a different importance to one or another aspect of understanding, but that's not important. It's not important who you are or where you come from or what you study, or if you're a great teacher of an established tradition. These are all different expressions of the same reality. The teachers of the North and South are but different expressions of the same reality. And I think that this has some bearing on what we do in contemporary Buddhist understanding and practice in the United States, is we're able to draw on all kinds of traditions and all kinds of expressions of Buddhist understanding, because there are as many expressions as there are people. How it enters my life is different than how it enters your life. But when I see how it enters your life, it's inspiring to me and helpful to me. And there's when you can see how the thread of understanding, the great mind of understanding has entered another person in their own unique life, you can really see how the deep connection that we all share. So this is all about the acceptance of individuals and the incredible aspect of sharing one mind that penetrates deeply every aspect of existence. So in a way, he's saying, he's a good diplomat. He's saying whatever expression you have of this deep understanding is valid. So now we're going to the next area. This is the 6th line, starting with the spiritual source shines clearly in the light. I wanted to mention one more thing about the northern and southern schools, which gradually coalesced into Soto Zen, which is what we practice, and Rinzai Zen, which is another form of contemporary Buddhist Zen. And so the northern school was beginning to be associated with sudden enlightenment, and the southern school beginning to be associated with gradual enlightenment. And there are still, sort of fairly lighthearted criticisms of each school, thinking that we or they have it and the other one doesn't. But this poem says that's not the case. It actually, what you can find the place for you within the appropriate tradition, and you're not confined to that. Okay, so the spiritual source shines clearly in the light, and branching streams flow in the darkness. So the spiritual source is this great mind, this vast mind of the great sage of India. And it shines in the light. And it starts out, so this part starts out to make you think that the light is the Buddha, symbolizes the Buddha Dharma. And then it says branching streams flow in the darkness. But branching streams refers to difference, not unity. And so, and it makes you start to think that that's darkness. But as we'll see, Sandokai of Sekito Kizen talks about darkness and light in a different way. But this is beginning to talk about spiritual source and branching streams, and that means is talking about unity, both unity and difference. And then so the next couplet is, to be attached to things, this is delusion. But just to understand that all is one is not enough. So we talk a lot about attachment and trying to soften attachment, trying to let go of attachment, and talking about attachment as a delusion and a lack of understanding. Sekito Kizen is saying, yes, that attachment is an aspect of delusion. But then he says, but to understand that all is one is not enough. So he's starting to undercut the idea that to be completely rid of delusion is the culmination of enlightenment. And then he talks about each and all the elements of the subjective and objective spheres are interdependent and at the same time independent. So he's saying so he's talking about subjective and objective. Subjective is the inner experience, and is our inner experience, and objective is our outer experience, you could say. And it's composed of elements, which he'll go into in a little bit. And all of these then, and the elements of subjective and objective, that is, I and thou, they're all interdependent, but they are independent at the same time. So he's starting to go towards an understanding of form and emptiness. They are related, though each thing keeps its own place. Form makes the character and appearance different, and we know this from the Heart Sutra. Form makes things look separate and different from one another, and it makes also pleasure and suffering look as though they are unrelated, and which is an interesting thing for us to consider, that pleasure and suffering look unrelated. And you might want to come back to that and talk about it a little bit. The dark makes all forms one. So here he's turning the idea that the light represents the mind of the great sage of India, and he's turning that on its head and saying the dark symbolizes that all forms are one. And in fact, in complete darkness, where there's absolutely no source of light whatsoever, you cannot, the eye cannot perceive any difference. If you've ever been in one of those chambers where there's a complete absence of light, you understand that you cannot have a relationship with anything that you cannot perceive. So this is the idea that when that actually the forms are there, but they are all one as far as perception is concerned, because there's no ability to perceive them. And then he says, in brightness, dualistic distinctions become apparent. So all of a sudden, the lights come on, and you can see all the people in the room, and you can see the walls of the room, and you can see the technology or whatever else is there. So that's what he's saying. But in fact, the circumstances are always the same. So whether or not it is you are abiding in the principle, or you're abiding within the phenomena, the principle being the same as emptiness, interdependence, those kinds of things. And in the dark, whether or not you are there in that state, or whether you're in the bright light of phenomena and independence, they are one and the same. They are not separate. It looks in the dark as if there's light and dark, and this is an effort to try to understand this deep connection between form and emptiness, as if they are different, but they're not. So which is the ultimate point of the Sandokai. But what I think is interesting about this is the next part is so there's this dynamic interpenetration in which unity shines in difference. So even in the multiplicity of difference, there is unity, and difference flows in the unity. So in radical unity, there is also all the difference that could be possible. So there is this dynamic interpenetration of both form and emptiness. And then here's a quote from Dogen. Let's see. And this is from the book that we read last year, called Living by Tao by Shohaku Okamura. And I think the way part of what this is talking about is we tend to think that there's heaven and hell, and if we get rid of all the things that are bothering us, we'll be in heaven. And if we don't do that, we'll stay in hell forever. And it's very easy to think this because all the words that we have, including the Sanskrit words of samsara and nirvana, make us think that these things are opposed to each other and separate from each other. But this poem is talking about the fact that they are, or the understanding that they are inseparable. They are one and the same. It's as if you're looking at them from different perspectives. You're looking at Thich Nhat Hanh would say interbeing. You're looking at it from two different perspectives, and he's symbolizing these perspectives in dark and light, in principle and phenomena, or relative and absolute and relative. So principle or absolute versus relative or phenomena. But the fact is, he's saying they are not separate. We are, because we live in the world of separation, and we're brought up to name things and see and learn how they relate to each other thing by thing, we have a language that expresses that understanding. So it's very hard to express this deep interpenetration in the words that we have. And maybe there, and as we've said before, there are not words that can express it. But he's trying very hard. So interestingly to me, the next section, which is very, I was going to read you this quote about Dogen. Dogen said that practice and enlightenment are actually one, and that there are actually no steps. So you can't step from form into emptiness. If there were steps, there would be deluded people and enlightened people, and there would be a step from the deluded to the enlightened stage of mind. There would be a separation between delusion and enlightenment, and between deluded and enlightened people. This separation is self-delusion, because in the absolute realm, there is no such step, no discrimination between delusion and enlightenment. Discrimination between enlightenment and delusion only exists in the realm of phenomena. There is no distinction in the realm of principle. In unity or emptiness, delusion and enlightenment are not different, nor are samsara and nirvana, or deluded human beings and Buddhas. And that's the teaching of emptiness, and that's the teaching of this poem. It's pretty hard to wrap your mind about it. I mean, I find my mind kind of flapping back and forth, and trying to get it. So it's this. So the thinking mind can't go there. So that's why we meditate and try to just let our thinking mind just take a rest. Just sit down and let it take a rest and see what happens. And then take that, whatever that happens, into our life. So as I was starting to say, this second element, this third paragraph refers back to, let's see, it really refers back to this thing about saying each and all the elements of the subjective and objective spheres are interdependent. So this is talking about, exactly what is that? What are the elements of the subjective and objective spheres? And it develops it much more fully. And I find it interesting that this to me is sort of like the other side of the Heart Sutra. Heart Sutra is really all about the Prajnaparamita, the wisdom of emptiness. And this is really about what it's like to be a human being. And so he starts out talking about the four elements, which traditionally, of course, and we have this in the West as well, that the fire, air, water, and earth. And he says the four elements return to their nature like a child to its mother. The four elements return, and he's saying that their nature is this in darkness. Into their ultimate nature is this dark emptiness, this interdependence. And they all, but he says, next line, he says, but fire is hot and wind moves, water is wet and earth is hard. So in fact, he's saying they return to their nature, the absolute, but at the same time, they function as separate things, separate phenomena. And he says eyes, and he talks about each of the things that each sense organ does: eyes, ears, nose, taste, tongue, and actually there are, then they consider the mind, the thinking mind, as one of these. So in that sense, they're each independent. But then he goes on to use another analogy: the leaves, which are the eyes that see, the ears that hear, the nose that smell, and the tongues that taste, they all come from the same root. They are all interrelated. And we can see that in our body. I mean, we can name these different abilities of the body, but they actually are deeply connected with one another. And it's very hard to, to have a whole human experience without one of them. So, and so each is independent of the other, but different leaves come from the same root. They all have the same source. The words high and low are used relatively. So again, he's saying we aren't going to make a distinction. We're not going to make a valuation of one or the other.